All right, today we're going to look at the ratification of the Constitution, or the ratification debate, and that was a debate that was between, as we talked about yesterday, the Federalist and the Anti-Federalist. The Federalists, they were the people that said Constitution, yay. They were in favor of the Constitution. They said, we need a stronger government to unify our country. Things are going, all these problems we've had is mostly because our federal government is too weak. We did create a more powerful government, but this government does some things to limit that power. It was a very careful limiting of that power. Even though it did give them more power, it limited it in many ways, in many powerful ways. And they say it's a good balance of power between the states and the national government. They did take and give some power to the national government, but it's still a good balance. And some of the key Federalists are James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, Ben Franklin, George Washington would have been one. These supporters tended to be wealthier. Not necessarily, it's not like within the Constitutional Convention it was the wealthier that supported it, but the average citizens of the country, the ones that the Federalists tended to be wealthier. They weren't all super rich, but they were probably a little better off on average than the Anti-Federalists. Let's talk about them next. And the Anti-Federalists, they were people that were against the Constitution for a number of reasons. One, as we talked about yesterday, they said there's not enough representatives. It's made the government too powerful. And the big one is that there's no Bill of Rights. They couldn't believe that there was not a Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Their state constitutions had them, and the English government had, we talked about the English Bill of Rights, and they just couldn't imagine that they'd created this Constitution without a Bill of Rights. Supporters, as we kind of talked about yesterday, they tended to be smaller farmers, and so not as wealthy, kind of the common man type person. And then some of the key members of the political class, and these wouldn't have been small farmers or anything like that. These were wealthy folks in general. That were Anti-Federalists would have been men like Patrick Henry from Virginia, George Mason, Richard Henry Lee as well from Virginia, and then Samuel Adams. Samuel Adams, as you know, from the pre-Revolutionary War days, very much a patriot like Patrick Henry and these others, but not in favor of the Constitution, felt like it gave the Constitution too much power. And really, they just couldn't imagine this Constitution without a Bill of Rights. So one of the things that's really significant about this Constitution and this debate is that so much of it happened, the country was all over the country. They were talking about it, especially in the places when there was a convention going on in that particular state. It was big news. It was kind of the main thing that people are talking about. Absolutely. And everybody had an opinion on it. But there was also a lot of, well, let's see what it says. Let's talk about this. It was probably one of the most informed debates that has ever happened in our country, and rightfully so. I mean, it was they were voting on and whether to create a new government, a completely new government, which is kind of a big deal, and it's lasted for a long time. So. And they knew it might, and so if you're going to have a government, you want it to be effective, and you want it to be a good government, and you don't want to have you want to have as few mistakes in it as possible. And so one of the things that they did is several of them, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay, they write this series of papers known as the Federalist Papers. Alexander Hamilton, by far and away, wrote the most. He was a prolific writer. He just was constantly writing and talking about these things, trying to convince people of the goodness of this new government. James Madison wrote the second most, but a distant second. but one of his is one of the most influential of the Federalist Papers to exist. And then John Jay. John Jay wrote a few of them, not many of them, like a handful, if at all. And there was a total of like 85 of these different papers. So John Jay wrote the fewest. Didn't mean he didn't support it. He just didn't write as many of those papers. But let's talk about Federalist number 10, a very important one. And one of the issues of the time is talking about that people had with the problem with that people had with elected representatives and this Republican form of government and giving people this much power. One of the complaints sometimes is that, well, you get a small group, a faction, a small group that's committed to a particular issue or committed to a particular way of doing things, and they can kind of get charge and gain control, and all of a sudden that faction is causing problems and can run things. And this argument says that, hey, that's one of the beauties of our government and of our country, is that we have a large country, and we're just going to grow. And so even if there will be factions that will form, but they won't be able to be big enough to gain control and really direct the country in one particular direction all the time. So having a large country actually makes it more difficult for a faction to gain control as opposed to less difficult, because there's just more there's more factions about, there's more different groups, and so getting one group to do that is going to be more difficult. So people are going to have to work together to get things accomplished. And one thing that they were concerned about, and they felt like that this country could do, was that the republic was, because it was so large, it would be diverse enough to prevent one faction from getting all the power, but there would still maintain, it gave enough power to the national government to keep, and the country would still, have enough in common, or enough commonality to maintain a unified government, a unified country. So there would be a cohesion among the states still, even if there was a lot of diversity and different factions. You would still be able to have a unified government. They felt like it was a very good mix. Now, and then one thing that also discussed is that, hey, with such a large country, one of the other benefits is, hey, there's a lot of people to choose from to elect, and the more people you have to choose from, the more likely you are to get good leaders, because you've got more people to pick from. And so the idea that the cream will rise to the top, the best leaders, those that are the most self-sacrificing, those that are the most able to guide and help the country would rise to the top because there's so many to choose from. It was one last thing that was kind of there in the Federalist number 10. So that's a little bit about the Federalist Papers. And then that brings us to the actual debate. And there was a lot of things that they debated, but one of the keys is just that the Anti-Federalists participate, which gives the debate legitimacy. If the Anti-Federalists had said, you know what, this Constitution is wrong, and you didn't even have a right, you weren't supposed to go change the government completely, you were supposed to just modify the Articles of Confederation, so this government you created has no legitimacy and we're not going to participate. Well, that would have been worse, because then it would have been as if this large portion of the population was against the Constitution, just decided we're not going to do this, and so then they would have felt no loyalty to the new government and may have tried to undermine this new government even after it was passed or something like that. And so by participating, in a sense, they're saying, yes, we don't like this, but if it wins, if your side wins, then we will then it's the law and we'll follow it. And so that was a really important part of this debate, is that the Anti-Federalists do choose to participate. The big demand they have is a Bill of Rights. They say, hey, if you promise to add a Bill of Rights, then we will pass it. And this is one of the things. It was difficult because how do you add this? Well, they decided the Federalists said we can add it. We promise we'll add it, but we can't do that now because then we're going to have to go back to every state that's already passed it and say, okay, now pass it with these amendments in it. So they said pass the Constitution, and then James Madison and others said, we promise one of the first things we'll do is add a Bill of Rights into it. And so once the Federalists say, okay, we'll agree to add to a Bill of Rights, that convinces enough Anti-Federalists to support the Constitution for it to pass in some of these states where they're having a hard time getting it passed, like New York and others. And so it doesn't convince all the Federalists. There's many Federalists that still don't go for it, but it does convince some. Men like Samuel Adams, who do eventually come around and say, okay, we'll give this a try with these guarantees that we will get these this Bill of Rights. Men like Patrick Henry are the other side. They said, no, you want me to agree to this, and then you're going to change it, and then you promise me you'll change it? That I'm not going to go for that. That sounds fishy to me. And so that's what they do. They get it passed, but only with the promise of a Bill of Rights being added.